Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
Welcome to this episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast, guys. Today I'm excited. We have Caroline, who is the co-founder of Treefera, a company on a mission that we have partnered with on the blockchain side to do a lot of really cool things. So without further ado, I'm going to let Caroline introduce herself. Caroline, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Will you give us just a little bit of who you are and where you came from to get to this show today?
Hi, Will. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Really appreciate you inviting me to join the community. Caroline Gray, as we mentioned, I am co-founder of Treefera, and that means I look after all things go-to-market. We founded Treefera with really the mission of really looking at environmental stewardship. We believe the path to decarbonisation needs to be fast-tracked, and ultimately the world accurately understands the value of real-world assets across the entire supply chain. That's where we come in with providing data on such assets. Ultimately, I come from a technology background. I was part of a very exciting company before this, which was a robotic software automation, a company called UiPath, which we had what was the fastest and one of the highest valued and most successful IPOs in the tech industry, which
No
we
big
did in
deal.
No big deal. Of course, after that, I was like, no, we're done. I won't do this again. I'm a bit tired. But of course, once you create these types of great, frankly, generational changing companies, of course, you want to move on to the next thing. And Jonathan and I, when we discussed Treefera, we basically said it was on us, and basically cannot leave this planet without trying to play our part in such an important agenda. So really happy to be here.
That's beautiful. You said a couple of things that I want to make sure we hit on. And one of those was real world assets. When we look into the blockchain side, when I think about the blockchain, a lot of times I think about the digital world, like what's happening in the digital world and matching that with what's happening in the real world via real world assets. And so can you define a little bit when you say real world assets and what you're doing with those? Can you talk about first defining what RWA or real world assets mean to you and to us, and then how does that fit with what Treefera is doing?
Absolutely. So to us, a real world asset is anything such as it could be a tree, it could be a whole field of a particular crop that creates palm oil. It could be, it's wood, obviously, that's cut down but still there and can be reused from a biomass or bioenergy point of view. It's also looking at commodities. So a lot of our clients, ingredients are really important to them, and commodities such as wood, palm oil, leather, all sorts of produce that comes basically from nature. That's ultimately at the core of our product and platform that we provide. And, another example is looking at carbon intensity. So we'll get onto that a bit later about a mutual client that we both have. But, looking at carbon intensity to see what, the methane status is within the atmosphere over certain farms from certain cows, what feed you can give them in order to make that more efficient and not have as many emissions. So we're really looking at all things like that and wrapped up and providing it very neatly into easy analytical insights.
Okay, so that last part, neat analytical insights, because when you look at the past, one of the things that I think about a lot when I think about both of our missions combined is we're leveraging the best technology in the world with AI and blockchain, bringing those together and matching technology with tradition, as Austin Allred would say to us. And so that tradition is happening. It's the things that have been growing, the real world assets, the trees, like you said, the fields, the ag. But when you bring it to technology, how is Treefera changing the game with that?
It's basically bringing trust. I mean, ultimately, as we've seen over the years, people have talked about this. I'm fairly new to this game, but people have talked about this for generations, and everyone's recognised, particularly the more progressive and insightful leaders, have recognised that this is an ongoing problem that we have. The industrial revolution, we're looking at multipliers that are off the charts with regard to how much we're using the world's natural assets. So I think really, your point about leveraging us, we also feel like working with Grow and in the Grow community, leveraging ultimately the best blockchain technology is between us. We're now bringing, people can actually see, buyers of these offsets or utilizer of the data can actually see, where has my milk come from? Where has that chair that I've purchased come from? What's the provenance of that chair? What impact has it had on the natural world? And am I buying what I'm being told I'm buying? That's ultimately, I think, the big benefits that we bring. And then on top of that, we bring it in at a pace that is, you're talking minutes to get this data and insights off a real world asset versus what is traditionally, some of our clients come to us and they've been taking 18 months, 2 years of going to find out the same analysis that we can do in seconds or minutes. And I think the speed and just the scale of it, and also that trustworthy, really brings what seems to be a very winning and successful solution for people.
It is. So when we have a partner you mentioned a little bit earlier, that's Royal Family Farming. And if you've been listening to this show, episode 1 is with Austin Allred, who is running that farm. And one of the things that we talked about there was his worm farm. So currently has the biggest worm farm in the world. And the reason he has that worm farm is to take his liquid waste from all of his cows, tens of thousands of cows. They poop and pee every day. Well, then he sprinkles that over worms. They eat that, and part of that in that process is methane reduction. And so, Caroline, we actually use that as a use case for us and kind of a test case of, does this work? So can you explain a little bit into that? And we'll go more in depth with Jonathan, your other co-founder and partner, on exactly how this works. But can you give us a high level of what we found there and what we did and what you specifically with Treefera were able to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, as you know, it's a mutual shout out, because I think Austin and what he's doing, what all of his team are doing at Royal Family Farms, is really progressive. And, fundamentally what I've been so impressed with them about is they're really all about soil health. And the reason they're like that, which I think is their secret sauce, basically, sorry, Austin, I'm giving that away, but is looking at the soil health because they really care not just about this generation, but about not degrading the environment for all their future generations. So it really is quite an amazing ecosystem he's building. And from our point of view, I think the wonderful thing I think that we've been able to do.
Keep going. But I want to come back to soil health. Don't let us forget that. So as you go into Royal Family, we're going to come back to soil health because I think that is maybe the key of everything that we're doing here. So keep going. I wanted to bracket that.
I'll get on to the methane. So basically what we're doing, obviously, as you know, they've been really progressive, even to the point that they call it the kitchen, about identifying and making sure that the cows themselves are consuming the best possible ingredients to minimise those emissions. And also to ensure the cows are healthier, so the meat is better quality, the cows themselves have a better lifestyle. There's all these great benefits that what they're doing contributes. What we're able to do is we are able to track that. Now we use satellites, we also use some methane droning, but that's really just to calibrate. Our models are now, and platform is now set up to comprehensively provide these assessments without droning. But we sometimes do that to just get additional calibration and make sure everyone's comfortable. And what we do is we run very quickly some scans and have our AI and machine learning models that then process a huge amount of data. And that is data not just from the specific site we're looking at, but also from many sites around the world to calibrate and really get an accurate assessment of what those emissions are. And as you probably know, well, I think you know this, Will, what we looked at obviously not just in the here and now in that month, but the whole historical, and we can go back to 1999. In Austin and Royal Family Farms case, we looked back to 3 years. But what we can do is then pull all those analytics together and we can see the ups and downs of what the methane emissions are within the atmosphere across the area. And it pulls out, so there was one particular month where we called out, and at the time we were thinking, we'll just check it with them because we'll calibrate it. That looks a very unusual anomaly. And the team straight away were like, no, that's true, because they had a challenge at that moment, which they were going to fix at a certain aspect of the farm itself, and therefore it had lower emissions. So it really does bring about a level of accuracy, which not only gives someone like Austin and his team knowledge and comfort that they're doing the right things, because it's another way for them to measure and calibrate what they're actually doing on the farm and very in real time. But it also gives companies that are customers of Austin's and Royal Family Farms, it gives them a level of confidence that when they're buying something such as a pint of milk, they really are able to say whether this is net zero or decarbonised milk, i.e. the offset has actually happened. So it gives, and in turn then makes their customers a lot happier, because their customers can then see that, and it's the same for customers on the Grow Network. They can actually see that themselves and then know once again what has actually happened and what the true emission data is. Rather than it being traditional methods have been over an 18-month, 2-year period, which obviously takes a long time and is far off of being accurate. And the other thing of balancing this, using this tech, and I think this is also the big game changer, of now you're using tech so you can actually identify from the cow's birth what all of the emissions are, including what the intakes are, including what milk has come from that particular animal and where that milk has gone to. So you're tracking the whole ecosystem and life cycle and therefore supply chain in that regard.
And can see it in real time, because you alluded to this. The old process of this was checking it every 12 months, doing spot checks, flying people out, having boots on the ground. And so that month that you talked about where actually there was maintenance happening, no one would have known what was happening. And so when you're really looking at optimizing the system, then you can see it in real time. Because one of the big problems when you look at particularly carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and other forms of credits that producers can get, they don't actually know. And so you have greenwashing happening, you have credits that are not actually true. You look at some of the lawsuits that some of the airlines have faced because they're buying credits that the action was not actually happening on the land. It was said It was happening, but it wasn't, or it was never in threat of, for example, being deforested. But with Treefera, you can see it almost instantaneously, which allows you to make adjustments. And I would say, very importantly, know the true value of that real world asset that moves into digital assets like credits and other things that are happening in the worlds that we're in, the economies that we're in.
Exactly right. Exactly spot on.
Okay, we hit something called soil health. And I think we've talked now a little bit about the mechanism of how this happens and the innovation that Treefera has brought to making this work now. But if you Google carbon credits or you Google biodiversity credits, there's a lot of talk around it. We'll say that, right? Some people over here, some people over here. One of the things that I've found as I've dove into it is the soil health matters. And when you're sequestering carbon and you're doing real world things, then that is actually proven. The soil gets better. Like when we look at the soils at Royal Family Farming before and after what they're doing with the methane reduction in the worm farm, there is improvement. And this to me is really what carbon sequestration is all about, actually creating biodiversity is about. And the truth of what we are monitoring, carbon is the word that we use, but really what we're talking about is regeneration of the earth itself. And we now have the ability to instantaneously track that. Can you speak to just your thoughts on that topic right there, on really, regardless of the term we're using, carbon neutral, et cetera, what are we actually doing?
I think that's exactly it. I think it's encouraging regenerative agriculture. I think that's ultimately what the time I've been involved in this from starting, I definitely thought of it of decarbonisation, of exactly all those terms that we use. But what I've come to, my conclusion on it is, if we all work to have the purpose of ultimately, we need to, because we do need to be fed, everybody needs to be fed, everybody needs to drink. We have all of those things, and we are, there's a vast population that is utilising this planet extensively. So, and that is not going to go away. But I think having people and custodians, the stewardship on the planet of landowners, I think is so critical. and not want to overplay them, but Royal Family Farms, I think, is such a good example. And we're seeing other examples like Amazon Conservation. We're seeing many other examples that are clients of ours around the world where they really recognise the stewardship as being absolutely critical. And what I mean by that is, of course, they need to do harvest. There's sometimes, they might need to do it because of customers, the demand has changed for the types of apples. But they might also need to do it because the trees are dead and therefore need to be cut down so that they're less damaging to it. So there's many reasons, but I think the whole thing that what I'm seeing successful landowners move away from, and therefore they frankly can command a higher price for the selling their own supply, as well as from an inset and offsetting point of view, is those that are really, really looking at the regen ag. And therefore the actual, as you said, the nucleus of that is about soil health. So don't sweat and overdo and over harvest the soil, because we've all seen what happens in commercial forests is that you might get 5-7 years and then that's done. And then you need to give it another 12 years before you can even start bringing that soil back to start harvesting again. But on the approach of this regen ag and looking after soil health first, actually you can continue to harvest in the right way for generations and generations continually. Yes, and there might be a change of field, but actually, we know we're seeing for our clients is actually a lot of them are getting higher yields and much better quality. So it's just, when you actually look at it in that ecosystem, which is definitely, I think, the new lens that I now, it's definitely something that I've been educated on over the last few years. That lens is so critical. And I think the more people that see that and do that and frankly get rewarded for it, which I think is what I'm really excited by the Grow and TreeFerra partnership, is that people can be rewarded for this now. So therefore it doesn't have to be a huge one-off investment for landowners to start this project. It can actually be a continual ecosystem, both on a commercially sound basis, but also a supply basis, when both can be successful.
Love it. I think of all of the people that I have talked to in this space, your lens, the Caroline Gray lens, is a really unique and special one because of who you are and your background. And then let me build that of why. We talked about your commercial success on the UI path and what you've done there. And you've been able to bring that into a world that's relatively new. This regenerative ag, the soils, the real world assets, all that's relatively new. You didn't do that on the UI path. But when you merge that two and you brought your brain to it, you learned it, and then you bring it to the commercial space, the lens that I think you have is the ability to see this through the big commercial companies in the world. And as we look at regenerative ag, we look at the homesteaders, the 1 acre, the 5 acres, the 40 acres, the 100 acres, and what we can do as individuals to feed ourselves. But one of the themes that I've seen is we have to feed the world as well. And with the way that the world exists now, it would be amazing if we could go back to everyone feeding their own selves and being sovereign. That is probably not going to happen in the next 100 years. We've just moved too far into big cities. You look at London, New York. I was just in Orlando, Florida, New York City. We've got to feed everybody. And so this massive food corporation that we see today, you've now been able to get kind of an inside look into how they're thinking about feeding the world while also continuing to be profitable. Can you speak a little bit to us on that lens that you see and how these larger corporations and companies are looking at the food supply chain and how they're looking at solving the problem of nourishing the earth? Because they know, although we, and myself included, will throw a little bit of hate their way to say, hey, you're part of the problem. However, I think we're seeing a big shift across the board that's saying, hey, we all want to do what's right. We all want to have a really good planet for generations to come. We want to nourish the world. But can you give us some insight into your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of facets to it. So we're out in Peru next week, as we know, and speaking to a number of, government, consortium owners, large scale enterprises and landowners. And if you just look at the Peru case, they've lost 150,000 hectares literally in the last year. Like, not, this is not like over the last 10 years. That's a big portion of land that they've lost within the last year, right, due to deforestation. You've also then got organisations, so like Danone, Nestle, Unilever, they're all, of course, profit, very successful, great commercial organisations that are on a mission to feed the world and with high quality. But if you quote Danone, they've lost 41% of their almond crop year on year in the last 2 years due to the climate crisis. So I think what I learned also during this process is that, and the same, we always see, there's always talk, isn't there, of like landowners being put, squeezed and stretched by large consortiums because they need to get the best price point, because frankly, that comes down to us as consumers. We want to get good bang for our buck, or there you go, or the pound, as it might be if we're here in the UK. Had to get that in. But basically they, so therefore there's that natural, again, that pressure for all parts. So I initially came into this thinking, ultimately, is this something the organisations want to do? We're seeing new regulation come in, the EUDR. Brazil has got a load of new regulation about what's happening with their supply chains. Peru the same, Ethiopia, Uganda. All of those big those big food providers, the growers, the governments are all putting in regulation, significant regulation. So, but what I've seen is that also the large organisations, going back to the Danone example, that is one of their highest margin, highest revenue earning products in the oil milk. So therefore, they also don't want it to run out. If it runs out, it gives them as a company a really big problem. So what I've learned during this process is, yes, there's of course the offset situation that I know companies, it's come in and out of whether success or not success. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that marketplace to bring the trustworthiness back, which again is why I love, and this is not, in the sense of what Grow does, of really showing the true, the true history and provenance of that, along with TreeFerra. But also then more fundamentally, it's in all of these parties' interests to keep supply coming. It's very easy for me in a tech world to sit there and say, hey, we provide the tech has changed this, because it really has. And I think what's great is we can be a great help, but we are just a small part. The ecosystem is looking at, we can't ravage these local landowners from, people that are educated and know how to work the land. We cannot ravage the landowners of people that need to work there. So we can't, afford for them to move away and decide to do different things. We always need people working in this ecosystem to supply food. So what I've learned during this process is like the insetting process that we touched on earlier in this discussion. And the fact, and therefore insetting is actually, I think, much bigger and much more important to the big organisations themselves as well as the landowners. But also ultimately for this ecosystem and the supply chains to work at speed and at scale in the growth that the demand is requiring, it requires all parties to come together. And it's becoming, frankly, much more important now for a large company like a Nestle to really know exactly what piece of land and who is the person looking after that piece of land and what activities are they performing on that land. Whereas historically, it's always been a consortium, and we have a client, they have, it's a consortium, 300,000 consortiums across Brazil, and within each of those consortiums, they have 200 to 300 small holdings of land. So that's how supply chains have always worked. Whereas now the connection, which I think is a really good one, is getting much closer between the large supply chain or the large seller, the consumer goods company, who's trading directly with a consumer, as well as then that of the small landowner, to understand it's got to work for both parties, and yes, there might be an impact. And I also think the great thing about consumers, we're all becoming so much more aware than we used to be about the quality. I mean, you can see that, Will, from look at the produce, how much attention and speed and excitement and interest has it got from Grow being able to sell and demonstrate the provenance of the produce, like the meat, like the tallow, that you've put on the blockchain from these various farms. it's really brought the consumers, for them being able to purchase that directly and really understand where it's come. You get returning customers all the time and they're happy and they don't actually mind paying a bit more, because it's the fact that people are understanding, where is this, the quality of this, health is so important to us. So sorry, I've gone on a very long-winded answer, but I just think commercially for me, the big light bulb moment was actually, this is not a push and pull thing like some traditional thing. This is about everyone needs this to work. And so it brings people around to the table to have sensible discussions around, making the right commercial agreements. It's like us, just one more thing I'll add and then I promise to shut up. TreeFerra, when we first entered this market, I think a lot of people that traditionally did data or provided data have also wanted a cut in the carbon credit or offset investments, which obviously last over 40 or 50 years. We very specifically said, now some people said we're mad, but we personally, for Jonathan and I and TreeFerra, that commercially is not important, because there's many parts in this ecosystem that are at play, and we're a technology SaaS platform at the end of the day, and therefore, and it wouldn't be right, because we need to be absolutely dependent. It wouldn't be good for Grow as the blockchain, and a very trusted blockchain with all the experience that you have. You want to be sure that the data you're getting is actually saying what's actually happened on the ground. You don't want a partner that wants a cut of credits, because then we'd be, the ecosystem wouldn't work. So, I think it's all about everyone playing their part in this ecosystem correctly. And that's what I'm excited by, which I think is happening.
I love it. I love the rant. I think it was very beautiful. It brings me to, if we want to make the change that we all want to see in the world, the first thing that has to happen to make consumer behavior change, producer behavior change, is you have to be aware of what is actually happening. And you said something in that was, we as consumers, we're becoming aware and educated at a pace that has never happened before.
Yeah.
Because of, you have things like the internet and AI and social media that bring things to the forefront. But what we are bringing with the marriage of a TreeFerra oracle that comes into a decentralized blockchain is trust, as we've mentioned, transparency in a quick way that is easy and accessible. And when we do that, you start to have more and more awareness. And not only are we aware, but we have trusted awareness. We have data that we can see that doesn't have a lot of human interaction and boots on the ground. It's coming straight from a drone or a satellite, moved into the TreeFerra platform, and we can see it. And then that brings awareness. And I think with that awareness comes the change that we all look to see, and the innovation. And so you take the awareness, you start to adjust behavior, and now there has to be innovation. We sit at this time where we can't just go backwards. We can't go back to what we did 100 years ago. If we want to go forward, we have to match the technology that we have today with the tradition and the knowledge of the past, and we will find a new and better way to exist. And that is what we are at the beginning of. And so, Caroline, to kind of bring this to a conclusion here, you are a Grow node owner. You run Grow nodes. Why? Why do you run Grow nodes? Why, when you look at everything that you've just discussed from the mission of TreeFerra, do you believe that adding the blockchain as a component to everything that TreeFerra is doing, and to just the overall mission of how we nourish the world, why is that important to you?
So a couple of things. Well, first and foremost, I mean, for me, and as you know, I was very new to the blockchain world.
Just so everyone knows, I think I've flown around the world with Caroline. We've been in Puerto Rico, Switzerland. We're looking at Peru, and it's been an amazing journey.
London. Just not London.
And we're working on
London. You've got to come to London.
Yes.
So when we first met, as you know, you've had to educate me very well, and thank you very much for the education. And so for me, the blockchain, I didn't really understand it. And, you have different opinions and people say different things about it, good and bad. But the bit that for me, the blockchain and Grow in particular has been absolutely game-changing, because in the same way that you talk about TreeFerra, that we're bringing the trustworthiness and the reach, the comprehensive, the transparency, is exactly what's happening in the blockchain. And, I speak to customers pretty much all day, every day. big and small, different, in different guises. And I think fundamentally, I mean, for me, one of the facts I didn't know is how many, most big companies are already working on blockchain. Some of them are weirdly building their own, others are like working in supply chains in particular. So one, I think that's a great thing, that actually this is becoming more and more the norm for how large enterprises are transacting. But most important for me are, if you think about it, from being able to tokenize these assets, provide everybody, whether you're a buyer or a seller or even just an observer, purely an observer, they're providing absolute transparency of the status. Whereas when I first entered this space and started educating myself on it and speaking to many different companies, people talked about buffers, people talked about, retirement, which are all things that still have to happen. But with the blockchain, it's not down to a manual registry or, the luck of somebody keeping something up to date. It's actually technically built into the underlying flow and life cycle of a carbon asset. And I think, and then not just a carbon asset, but ultimately whatever a good or an ingredient, whatever it is we might be purchasing. So for me, that is absolutely, I mean, it's game changing. And I think I obviously know obviously how we've been working together. I think the strictness, the integrity and the authenticity of how you at Grow, but also the wider blockchain network that Grow is associated with, for me has really come across, because it's been so important for you to be that registry DAO that, again, keeps complete independence and has the distributed network. So that is my first and foremost biggest factor that I just think is game changing for every use cases, every persona, or everyone interacting with Grow. I love it, as you know. And then I think on a personal note, I mean, you know me, I came from building up big sales teams virtually and everything else. And I realised a lot of it is the same. It's actually a lot of the same process and mechanism. But again, what we're doing is building into a very technical network. But also we have now this global reach, where we can really reach people that we might have missed, or we might not have been able to have access to, and vice versa. They have access to us because they were in some far-reaching place that we weren't able to afford the investment of going out locally and setting up a local TreeFerra office or a Grow office. And that's also the power for me for the blockchain of really taking it to a landowner, to an individual consumer. So it means everyone can participate. And fundamentally, again, for the feeding the world and the values that we, I think, hold very dear to us, that is such a big deal. It is game changing. So I'm really genuinely very excited, not just on a personal basis, but also for what we're doing. I really believe it. I think we're actually going to change the supply chain in the world. So I really do. I love it.
I do too. I think that's an amazing place to cap it off. We're in the place of change. And I used to think, I've said this a couple of times. When I was younger, I used to watch movies and be like, man, I wish I was born in a different time. It's kind of boring. And as I found what we are doing, what we're doing together, I wake up every day excited. I love what we do. I love the conversations. And I'm so thankful that I'm alive right now, because we live in this amazing time of innovation and change. And I think more can happen over the next couple of decades than has happened in hundreds of years previously. And right now, we're doing it with the things we're doing. So Caroline, thank you for everything you are, being who you are, and bringing everything to our community today. Is there any last words that you want to leave us with to the community of Grow?
Well, I just want to repeat the thanks. I, feel incredibly grateful to be part of this community. I really appreciate the trust from the community. We do not take that lightly. We take it very seriously about the mission we're on. And to your point, I think, the world, the digital world, thankfully, is accelerating at a huge pace. Why wouldn't we let it help us, help the natural world retain and reinvigorate the natural world to make sure we can continue to receive the food and, and enjoy nature to its full extent. So very grateful and very excited about this journey. It's
Thank you,
definitely had a
Caroline.
lot of attention, Will.
It has, and it's only getting more. It's only getting
Yeah,
more. So thank you, Caroline, for being here. Thank you to everyone that has listened to this episode. If you have made it this far, thank you, because none of this is possible and none of it moves as quickly and as efficiently without a community of people behind it. And so, as Caroline just mentioned, every single one of us is important because the digital world is moving. AI, blockchain, the internet, all of it is going to move with or without us. Why not use it in the best ways possible? And I can't think of a better way to use it and leverage it than to find the best ways to nourish the world that nourishes the animals and the planets on it, that nourish us. And we create a full circle regenerative system that includes the digital world as well. So thank you all for listening. Make sure you turn in. This is part 1 of our episode with the co-founders of Treefera. Part 2 is going to be with Caroline's sidekick, Jonathan, and we will get him on and we will dive a little bit deeper into everything that we are doing. So thank you all for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and share this with as many people as possible. See you guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.